Jimin faces dismissal by HYBE if he reveals Jungkook's shocking secret he asked to leave the group a year ago. A dark web of lies unfolds. If you say a word about Jungkook, you're finished. The words landed like a gunshot in the cold, sterile conference room. The fluorescent lights hummed above, indifferent to the storm erupting below. Jimin's fingers clenched tightly around the edge of the metal table, his knuckles white, nails digging into his palms, blood silently blooming where flesh surrendered to fury. The man across from him, Mr. Han, HYBE's head of internal affairs, sat unmoved, his suit pristine, his eyes deadpan, unreadable. The silence between them thickened, heavy with the weight of buried truths and corporate threat. Jimin's jaw tightened. "He's not your property," he said, low, each word trembling with held-back rage. "He's a human being." Mr. Han adjusted his tie with surgical precision. "And so are you, Mr. Park. Replaceable." Outside the tinted windows, Seoul's skyline glittered under midnight clouds, but in that room time stood still. Jimin could feel the edges of his control frame. Ever since Jungkook vanished from the public eye 3 weeks ago, officially for creative rest, the world had spun rumors like gold. But only Jimin knew the truth. Jungkook hadn't disappeared. He had walked away. A year ago. But HYBE had stitched a smile on his absence, engineered ghost appearances, manipulated live streams, and suppressed every trace of resistance. Jimin had stayed silent. Until now. A month before this confrontation, Jungkook had shown up at his door at 3 a.m., rain-soaked, shaking, eyes haunted. He hadn't said much, just that he couldn't breathe, that the music wasn't his anymore, that the cameras felt like knives. "I don't belong here anymore," Jungkook had whispered. "Promise me you won't let them twist it." Jimin had promised. But now the walls were closing in. The group's world tour was about to be announced. The posters had Jungkook's face plastered front and center. But there was no Jungkook behind the image. Just pixels. Projections. Lies. Back in the conference room, Jimin felt the pressure building in his chest, a storm on the brink of detonation. "I'm not afraid of losing this job," he said quietly. "But he's afraid of you losing it," Mr. Han replied, just as quiet. "You think Jungkook wants you to burn everything for him? Do you think he left to become a symbol of scandal?" The words landed heavy. Jimin faltered. Outside, a police siren cried in the distance, too far to matter. Mr. Han slid a folder across the table. A contract. Confidentiality clause. Updated. Sign, and HYBE would keep the illusion alive. Jimin's future would stay intact. So would Jungkook's vanishing act. Or refuse and let the world crumble. Jimin stared at the paper. His hand hovered. He remembered Jungkook's voice, raw, terrified, real. "Don't let them win." The pen trembled in his grip. His heart pounded. Choices roared through his veins like fire. And somewhere, deep inside him, something broke. But he didn't speak. Not yet. Not here. Outside the room, reality waited, teeth bared. And Jimin knew this was only the beginning. "You were supposed to protect him, Jimin. Not let them sell him like a ghost." The voice came from behind, sharp as shattered glass. Jimin turned, stunned. Standing by the emergency exit of the training studio, Taehyung's silhouette was barely visible in the flickering hallway light. His jaw clenched, hair tousled, eyes blazing not with anger, but betrayal. Jimin's throat closed. "Tae, you don't understand. I tried." Taehyung stepped closer, the door swinging shut behind him with a hollow clang. "You tried?" he snapped. "Is that what we're calling it now? Watching him disappear piece by piece while you nod through every scripted lie they hand you." The rehearsal room was empty save for them. Empty mirrors stretched across the wall, reflecting 2 fractured men standing in a place once filled with music, laughter, and brotherhood. Now the air felt poisoned, thick with resentment. "I didn't nod," Jimin said quietly. "I endured. I listened. I waited. You signed the clause," Taehyung interrupted, voice low now, almost disgusted. "You sat in that room and chose your career over his truth." Jimin's face twisted with pain. "He asked me to survive it, Tae. He begged me not to set myself on fire for him. And what about us?" Taehyung took another step forward, voice rising. "Do you think we don't know something's wrong? Do you think we're blind to the edits, the fake posts, the way HYBE locks the door to Jungkook's studio now? You think I haven't tried to break in? Or that Namjoon hasn't been asking questions and getting stonewalled?" Jimin looked away. Taehyung's voice cracked. "He was our brother, Jimin. He is our brother. But you're acting like he's a casualty we're supposed to move on from." "I see him every night," Jimin snapped, louder now, breaking. "In my dreams. In the way I hesitate before speaking. In every goddamn mirror I pass. You think I don't feel it? That I don't ache with the guilt of every silent second I play their game?" The words hung in the air, echoing off cold walls. Taehyung didn't reply. The door behind him opened suddenly, startling both of them. It was Hoseok. He looked from one to the other, then shut the door behind him slowly. "You're both being reckless," he said. Calmly, but there was steel in it. "You think they don't have this room tapped?" "They do," Taehyung muttered. "And I don't give a shit anymore." Hoseok moved toward them quickly, grabbing both their arms and pulling them to the farthest corner of the room. "Jungkook came to see me too," he whispered. 3 days before he vanished for good. He said the label threatened to recontextualize his departure if he ever spoke up. Recontextualize? Jimin echoed, nauseated. "Frame it," Hoseok clarified. "Make him look unstable, disloyal, even dangerous if they had to." He showed me a draft article HYBE had prepped. They were ready to leak it. Said he had a history of erratic behavior. Taehyung's hands balled into fists. "They would have ruined him," Hoseok said, jaw tight. "Not just career-wise. Publicly. Psychologically. They were counting on us staying quiet to protect the legacy." "And what did you say?" Jimin asked. "I told him I'd do what he couldn't," Hoseok replied. "Stay inside long enough to pull the plug from within." The room fell into stunned silence. Jimin turned to him. "You mean?" "I'm still under contract," Hoseok nodded. "But I'm not loyal to them. I'm loyal to us." For a moment, something fragile stirred in Jimin's chest. A whisper of the bond they once had. Of the fire they used to burn with, not for fame, not for numbers, but for each other. "Do you know where he is?" Taehyung asked suddenly. Hoseok hesitated. "I know where he was. I'm not sure if he stayed." "Then we find him," Taehyung said, voice hardening into purpose. "We end the silence before they do something irreversible." Jimin felt the weight of his silence crushing his ribs. "They'll come for us." "They already are," Hoseok said. "HYBE sent me a new NDA last week. Extended clauses. Retroactive liability. They're scared." Taehyung cracked a wry grin. "Good. Let them be." A moment later, Jimin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A blocked number. He answered. Static. Then a voice. Soft. Unmistakable. "Hyung. Jungkook." Jimin's knees nearly gave out. "Jungkook? Where are you?" "I don't have long," came the whisper. "They're close. But you need to know it wasn't just me. There are others. Trainees. Artists. They're trapped." "Trapped where?" Jimin asked, panic rising. A gasp. A scuffle. Distant shouting. "Don't trust anyone, not even." The call cut off. Silence. The room spun. Jimin stared at the phone like it had caught fire. Taehyung stepped forward. "What did he say?" Jimin swallowed. "He's being hunted. And he's not the only one." Hoseok's face darkened. "Then this isn't just about protecting him anymore. It's about exposing everything." And in that moment, as the three of them stood shoulder to shoulder, a line was drawn. No longer idols on a stage, but soldiers in a quiet, brutal war. Outside, Seoul glittered like a lie made of glass. Inside, the truth burned. And it would not stay buried. "Tell me what you saw." Jimin's voice was low, barely a breath as they sat huddled in a dark corner booth of an old cafe in Daehangno. Rain lashed against the windows like claws, and the occasional crack of thunder masked their voices. Hoseok glanced around, his hoodie pulled low, his expression grave. "A basement level below the secondary training complex," he said. "It's not on any internal blueprint. I only found it by accident. There's a side elevator behind the costume vault, the kind that needs biometric access." Jimin's stomach twisted. "You think Jungkook was being held there?" "I don't know. But I heard someone crying down there. Not just one voice, many. It didn't sound staged." Taehyung, sitting across from them, leaned forward. "This goes beyond cover-ups. What the hell is HYBE doing behind those doors?" Hoseok didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was stripped bare of hope. "They're creating products. Not artists." Jimin couldn't stop his hands from shaking. His teeth sat untouched. Every memory of laughter in those halls now cracked and bent under the weight of what lay beneath them. "The trainees?" he asked. "Yes," Hoseok confirmed. "They're not allowed to keep phones anymore. Not even in dorms. They have sleep monitors, scheduled drugs disguised as vitamins, and anyone who questions it vanishes." "They always said mental health was their priority," Taehyung said bitterly. Hoseok scoffed. "As long as it doesn't cost market value." Silence settled like dust over them, thick and unwelcome. Then Jimin pulled out his phone again. Still no message from the blocked number. The echo of Jungkook's last words haunted him. "They're not just holding me back. They're holding others." He had replayed that voice in his head so often it began to blur into hallucination. Taehyung suddenly asked, "Do you remember the Tokyo showcase in 2022? "Of course," Jimin said, startled. "Why?" There was a backup dancer, Sunhee. She was bright, kind. Said she'd been in the trainee system for almost 6 years. Then, after the showcase, gone. You think she's? I know she's missing. I tried reaching out last year. Her Instagram's wiped. Even her old classmates said her parents stopped speaking about her. Jimin stood abruptly. I need to see the basement. Impossible, Hoseok replied. Not unless we breach internal security. And if we're caught, then they'll do to us what they tried to do to Jungkook. The words hung like poison in the air. Taehyung rose too. I'll get us access. Hoseok narrowed his eyes. How? Taehyung pulled out a small plastic card and placed it on the table. A security badge. Junggi left me this when he quit. Said I'd know when to use it. Jimin's breath caught. Wait, Junggi knew? He didn't say it outright. But he left a note. Said, don't believe what they tell you. Believe what they try to hide. The plan formed faster than any of them had expected. They would wait until the next scheduled after-hours rehearsal, the kind that used the entire building's power grid and disabled certain surveillance feeds. Hoseok knew when they'd have the best shot. And Taehyung had memorized the route through the costume archive, where guards rarely checked. 2 nights later, they stood at the edge of that dark hallway. The elevator was disguised as a solid wall panel, seamless, sterile. Taehyung placed the badge over a faint scanner, and the wall clicked open with a hiss. A gust of cold air brushed past them like something exhaling from below. Jimin stepped in first. The descent was silent. The only sound was the mechanical heartbeat of the old machinery guiding them downward. Each floor they passed was darker than the last. The final floor had no number. Just a blank panel. The doors opened to blackness. Hoseok turned on his flashlight. What they saw twisted something inside each of them. Rows of small, padded rooms, soundproofed, windowless. No beds. Just mats. Harsh fluorescent lights overhead, some flickering. And on the far end, a larger room filled with computers, monitors looping muted footage, trainees crying, rehearsing until collapse, some being injected with unidentified fluids. This is, Jimin choked, a prison. An experiment, Taehyung whispered. They moved quickly, avoiding cameras. But the cameras, some weren't even active. Hoseok pointed out that they weren't connected to any live system. Just there for intimidation. And then, in one room, they found it. A message scrawled onto the wall, faint as if scratched in desperation. JK was here. Do not believe the silence. Jimin dropped to his knees. He was here. Taehyung placed a hand on his shoulder. And he escaped. They kept searching, found a folder inside a locked drawer. Inside were transcripts of monitored calls, emails, internal evaluations. One file was marked JK termination contingency. Termination? Hoseok whispered. That's not about firing him. Jimin turned pale. They planned to fake a breakdown, he said, reading fast. They had psych reports drafted. News posts written. Even mock fan reactions from bots ready to launch. If Jungkook ever told the truth, they'd paint him as delusional. Suddenly an alarm blared. Red lights. Motion sensors had caught them. Run! Hoseok shouted. They dashed down the corridor, retracing steps, but guards had already arrived above. They made it to the elevator just in time, slamming the button. The door closed seconds before security reached them. No words were spoken as they shot back up. But inside the elevator, they knew. There was no turning back. They weren't just fighting for Jungkook anymore. They were fighting for every soul still trapped beneath the polished image HYBE had sold to the world. Back at Jimin's apartment, they laid everything out on the floor, photos, files, evidence. The full scale of the machine was terrifying. Media manipulation. Mental warfare. Exploitation under the guise of performance. I want to go public, Jimin said. Now. HYBE will retaliate, Hoseok warned. I don't care, Jimin said. They can take my name. My image. My money. But I'll burn it all if it means saving him. Taehyung looked down at the file marked JJK one more time. Then he said, we leak it to a journalist. Someone independent. Someone unafraid. Hoseok nodded. I know someone. She used to cover us back when we were rookies. She left KN because of the rot. And after that? Jimin asked. Then we disappear, Hoseok said. Until the world hears the truth. Jimin stood, a quiet fire in his chest. No. We don't disappear. We stand. We speak. And we make them listen. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city hummed in oblivious indifference. But within 3 men, war had begun. And their voices, once used to sing to millions, would now be used to destroy the silence that caged them all. You leaked the files? Yes, Jimin whispered, his voice trembling with exhaustion and fire. To Min Seojin. She'll publish them tonight. The room fell into a deep, electric silence. It was 2:37 a.m. and the apartment was drenched in shadows. Rain pulsed faintly against the windows like a ticking clock counting down to war. Hoseok stood in front of the small, flickering TV where Seojin's independent news blog was already preparing its servers for a traffic search. Taehyung was by the kitchen, unmoving, his hand frozen around a glass of untouched water. JIMIN stood in the middle, no longer shaking, no longer unsure. There was a steadiness in him now, carved from rage and buried guilt and the unbearable grief of silence. He had uploaded the internal files, the footage from the basement, even the recordings they'd managed to recover from Jungkook's hacked voicemail. Everything was in that digital package, an unmasking of an empire built on performance and pain. What if they come after her? Hoseok asked. She knew the risk, JIMIN replied. She said if anyone could survive being eaten by HYBE's machine, it was her. And Jungkook. Taehyung's voice was suddenly rough. He still hasn't called. JIMIN looked away. He might never call again. But at least now he'll know we didn't stay silent. Taehyung slowly walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just a sliver. The street below was empty still. But there was a car parked across the street with its engine off. It had been there for 2 hours. I think we're being watched, he muttered. We expected that, Hoseok said. But they can't touch us, not after this goes live. If they do anything now, it'll confirm everything. JIMIN sat on the floor, head in his hands. We should have done this sooner. You couldn't, Taehyung said quietly. You were too close. Too afraid of breaking what we spent our lives building. I wasn't afraid of breaking the group, JIMIN said, his voice muffled. I was afraid of breaking him. If I'd said something last year, maybe he wouldn't have had to run. Maybe he would have stayed. Maybe he wouldn't feel so alone. Taehyung came over and knelt beside him. He never felt alone. You carried him longer than anyone. But now it's time we carry you. JIMIN looked up, eyes red. Then the TV beeped. A notification. Seojin had published the article. The headline exploded across the screen. Inside the idle machine, leaked documents reveal HYBE's secret trainee program and forced silence of Jungkook. It was raw, brutal, and filled with verifiable evidence. Within minutes, the servers buckled. Hashtags started to trend. Fans began to scream online, first in disbelief, then in confusion, then in a rage that lit up the internet like wildfire. In a group chat once reserved for stage planning, the silence from the other members was deafening. Jeon had seen it. Namjoon too. But no one was speaking. Then finally a message. Namjoon, is it true? JIMIN's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he typed. Yes. All of it. I'm sorry for keeping it from you. Read. No reply. Seconds later, another message popped up. Yoongi, thank you. And then. Jeon, I left the system to avoid becoming a puppet. Now I see I was already one. A pause. Namjoon, they're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. I think they're going to try to pin this on you. JIMIN's jaw tensed. Let them try. Taehyung and Hoseok exchanged a look. They knew what was coming next. The next morning, JIMIN walked into the HYBE building flanked by security. Not theirs, HYBE's. The guards escorted him to the executive boardroom where cameras had been shut off. Every executive was present. So was the internal PR lead, the head legal counsel, and two faces JIMIN didn't recognize, government liaisons, perhaps. The air was heavy with danger. Mr. Han, the same man who had threatened him weeks ago, stood at the front of the table. You've violated multiple clauses, he began, flipping through a binder. You've publicly endangered the stability of our organization. You've damaged shareholder trust. JIMIN didn't flinch. I told the truth. You've also opened us up to criminal investigation, Han continued, eyes glinting. Which makes you legally liable if any of your claims are found false or slanderous. They're not. We'll see what a judge says. I'll see what the world says, JIMIN replied. Han smirked. Your contract is void. Effective immediately. Your likeness, your past works, your digital identity belongs to us. You'll be erased. I don't care. Han's grin widened. No. But Jungkook will. JIMIN froze. Don't pretend we haven't located him, Han said, almost amused. Don't pretend we don't know exactly which safe house he's in, who he's with, and how fragile he still is. You want to burn bridges? We'll burn people. JIMIN stood. Touch him and I swear to God, I will drag this entire building down with my bare hands. You already tried, Han replied. And what did it get you? An angry fanbase? A fractured group? A legacy in flames? JIMIN leaned across the table. It got me my soul back. And with that he turned and left the room. Outside, the storm had begun again. But it wasn't rain. It was the avalanche of public reckoning. Journalists hounded the gates. Former trainees began to speak. Anonymous posts, tearful live streams, whistleblower letters. And in the middle of it all, JIMIN walked into the eye of the hurricane, not as a fallen idol but as a man who had chosen truth over survival. That night, he returned home to find an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single photograph. Jungkook standing at a pier in Busan. Alone. Put up. Looking out at the sea. On the back, a note in shaky handwriting. You didn't fail me. You freed me. JJK. JIMIN sat down, holding the photo against his chest, and for the first time in months cried without shame. Outside, the city raged with change. Inside, a single voice began to hum a melody that had no producer, no contract, no silence to bury it. It was the beginning of something truer than fame, and far more dangerous than lies. The world had changed overnight. News stations scrambled to cover what they once ignored. Documentaries that were shelved resurfaced. Old clips of Jungkook, long thought ordinary, were now being dissected frame by frame, his silence in interviews, the tired weight behind his eyes, the unfinished words in variety shows suddenly speaking volumes. The truth was viral. And irreversible. HYBE tried to contain it. They released statements that danced around the fire but never touched its flame. They called it miscommunication, distortion, a deeply regrettable breach of internal trust. They threatened legal action. They claimed doctored evidence. But the more they denied, the louder the truth screamed. What they hadn't expected was who joined in next. Jeon posted a handwritten letter. It began with the words, "There are some things even military silence cannot justify." Namjoon held a live session, not the stylized, high-def kind, but a raw, glitching one from what looked like a borrowed phone. He said only this, "Sometimes love means breaking the myth." And then Jungkook, quiet and precise as ever, posted an audio clip to a private SoundCloud link. It was a voice memo recorded years ago, Jungkook crying softly, saying, "They said I owed them everything. I said I just wanted to sing." It shattered the fandom. Some refused to believe. Others fought blindly. But the world had moved and nothing could force it back. JIMIN didn't leave his apartment for 3 days after the fallout. Not because he was afraid, but because the noise was too much. Drones buzzed past his windows. Journalists camped outside the building. He turned off the lights, sat on the floor with nothing but silence, and the photo Jungkook had left him. On the 4th day, there was a knock. He opened it expecting another reporter. Instead, it was Namjoon. The older man looked worn, older somehow in just a week, eyes sunken but alive with something unspoken. They stood in silence before Namjoon stepped in and closed the door behind him. JIMIN braced for anger. For betrayal. For confrontation. But Namjoon said nothing. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, sat down on the floor like he used to when they were 20, broke and afraid. Then he simply said, "How long?" JIMIN sat across from him. "Since February last year. That was when he first told me." Namjoon let out a slow breath. "He told me too." Not directly. He didn't say the words. But he didn't need to. JIMIN closed his eyes. "Why didn't we stop it then?" Namjoon stared at the floor. "Because we were too loyal. To the image. To the machine. To a promise none of us really understood anymore." Silence sat between them like an old ghost. Then Namjoon looked up, eyes burning. "Do you know what HYBE did today?" JIMIN shook his head. "They terminated your image rights. Not just your contract. They filed to digitally remove you from group archives. AI erasure. They're building a version of us without you. Without him. They think the brand is stronger than the truth." JIMIN didn't flinch. "Let them try. They're also planning to hold a press conference. Controlled Q&A. They want us to publicly denounce misinformation. Will you do it?" Namjoon's gaze didn't waver. "No. But they're pressuring the others. Taehyung's on edge. Hoseok's already being watched. And Jeon, he's receiving letters threatening his family." JIMIN stood. "Then we go louder." Namjoon nodded. "That's why I'm here?" He pulled out a flash drive from his coat pocket and handed it to JIMIN. "What is this?" "Every internal HYBE meeting I've recorded in the last year. Even the ones we weren't supposed to be in. Hidden mics. Hidden cameras. You're not the only one who's been building a truth file." JIMIN took it chest tight. "You were waiting for this moment?" Namjoon looked at him and said, "I was waiting for you to stop being afraid." And that night, they burned the last bridge to the past. They uploaded it all, secret boardroom meetings where executives spoke of mental control, quotas, behavioral adjustments for idols deemed emotionally unstable. Audio of a HYBE manager telling a young trainee, "You belong to us now. Cry in your own time." Video of performance injuries dismissed with the phrase, "You only need to look okay from the waist up." Then, at 2 a.m., JIMIN went live. Not from Weverse. Not from Instagram. but from a new platform created by Jeon and hosted in servers outside Korea. It was titled simply, "This is not betrayal. This is survival." The camera was shaky, his voice even more so, but every word was a matchstick. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect applause. But I expect you to listen. Not as fans. Not as followers. As human beings. We sang to you because we believed the music was ours. But the truth is we were never free." He didn't cry. Not until he reached the end. When Jungkook left, he wasn't running away from us. He was running toward who he was before we were sold. Before we were weaponized. And if that's a betrayal, then I hope to betray every cage that ever silenced a voice. He ended the stream. And the world exploded. But behind the noise, in a quiet apartment in Busan, Jungkook was watching. His hands trembled as he reached for the old mic he'd kept hidden in a drawer. The one without filters. Without corporate tuning. Just him. Just his voice. He opened his laptop, clicked record, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he sang. It was a simple song. No beat, no chorus. Just words. But each one was a nail in the coffin of the lie they'd lived. And the beginning of something terrifying and beautiful and free. The world didn't end. It just stopped pretending. JIMIN sat in the corner of a dark green room in a studio no one knew about, in a building that had no name. The city outside had turned into a battlefield of words. Protests, statements, petitions, documentaries rushed into production. HYBE spokesperson was punched outside their corporate tower by a former trainee's father. Another one had a breakdown on live television. Every platform HYBE once controlled was now cracked open. Leaks came from inside, editors, stylists, interns, even marketing interns who had seen too much. Every one of them brought pieces of the puzzle that made the monster visible. And at the center of it was him, Park Jimin. He didn't ask to be the martyr. He wasn't trying to be one. But people were listening now. Not because he shouted, but because he bled. The door behind him opened. The light that poured in was golden. Like the first sunrise after a storm. "Thought I'd find you here." Jimin turned. Taehyung stood at the doorway, holding a box of warm tteokbokki and 2 cans of peach soda. "You look like a man who hasn't eaten in 12 hours, Taehyung added. Jimin blinked. "I thought you were on house arrest. Technically, I'm being monitored for contract violations, but no one's brave enough to stop me walking out the front door anymore. Especially not after you burned the kingdom down." Jimin laughed, the sound bitter and soft. "I didn't burn it. I just stopped holding the fire in." They sat in silence, eating with their hands, like they did when they were teenagers. The grease on their fingers made them feel real again. Human. Not curated. Not streamed. "You know Jungkook's song has 70 million plays in 24 hours? Taehyung said, licking sauce from his thumb. "I know," Jimin said. "I listened. Every syllable. Every breath. I could hear the 15-year-old he used to be." Taehyung leaned back against the wall. "He wants to see you." Jimin paused. "You talked to him?" Taehyung nodded. "He called me. Said he's in Jeju now. Hiding but no longer running. He said he finally felt safe enough to come home." Jimin didn't respond immediately. "I'm scared," he said. "Of what?" "Of seeing him, and realizing I didn't do enough. That I failed when it mattered most. That I only became brave when there was no one left to protect." Taehyung reached over and gripped his shoulder. "You did more than any of us. You shattered the lie. You opened the cage." "He lost everything," Jimin whispered. "His voice, his place, his peace. But he didn't lose you." That night, Jimin didn't sleep. He packed only a small bag and wore no disguise. He boarded the last flight out to Jeju, surrounded by whispers and stares. But no one dared approach him. There was something in his walk that said this isn't a story you want to interrupt. He arrived just after sunrise. The beach was empty. Fog curled around the stones like ghosts exhaling. And there he was, Jungkook, standing barefoot in the sand, arms crossed, hoodie too large for his frame, eyes that had seen the inside of every lie and lived. They didn't run. They didn't cry. They just looked. "You came," Jungkook said first. "You sang," Jimin replied. And that was enough. They walked for hours. No cameras. No rehearsed speeches. Just truth. Jungkook told him everything. The breakdown in Osaka that no one ever knew about. The panic attacks disguised as vocal fatigue. The pills they gave him to keep the smile glued on. The night he carved a message into the wall of his soundproof cell, because he didn't think he'd ever be found. They told me I was selfish, Jungkook said quietly. For wanting to breathe. Jimin stared out at the sea. You weren't. They said I betrayed the fans. They betrayed the fans when they turned you into a product. Jungkook turned to him, the wind brushing strands of hair across his face. Do you still believe in music? Jimin swallowed. I don't know what I believe in anymore. But I know I believe in you. Jungkook's eyes welled, but no tears fell. I have one last thing to do, he said. 2 days later, they walked into a studio together. Not a big one. Not polished. A dusty, analog place owned by an old jazz producer who didn't know how to upload to TikTok and didn't care to learn. They recorded one song. One take. No auto-tune. No edits. It was raw. Breathless. Pain and love in equal measure. It was titled, We Were Not Made to Stay Silent. When it dropped, it didn't just chart, it rewrote what charts meant. Because it wasn't a product. It was a funeral and a resurrection. A requiem for everything stolen. And a revolution for what still could be saved. HYBE collapsed in on itself not with an explosion, but with a slow decay. Executives stepped down. Lawsuits stacked. Sponsors pulled out. One by one, the machine's gears rusted and jammed and died. But the boys? They lived. Not all together. Not the way fans once knew. But they lived honestly. Some left the industry. Some rebuilt it from scratch. Some disappeared into peace. Jimin went silent again. Not from fear, but from knowing he had said all he needed to say. One night, years later, at a small open mic in an unnamed bar in Seoul, someone walked on stage. No fanfare. No lights. Just Jimin, older now, but fire still in his chest. He sang that same song. No backup. No beat. And when he finished, no one clapped. They just stood. Still. Quiet. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because, for once, they finally knew what it meant to listen. And that was the legacy. Not fame, but freedom. The world had quieted, but it was not peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after an earthquake, where the dust hasn't settled, and everyone is still checking if the floor beneath them is real. Jimin sat on the rooftop of a small building in Yongyang, legs dangling off the edge, eyes fixed on the faraway line where sea met sky. The waves below looked peaceful, but the scream inside his chest had not lessened. He didn't know if it ever would. The firestorm after the song had died down. For the public, the narrative had evolved. Journalists were now writing think pieces about idol trauma as if it was theory. Fans were split into factions, some called them brave, others traitors. But most had gone silent. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to care the right way anymore. HYBE had been fractured, not destroyed. The board had rebranded under a new umbrella, spinning off subsidiaries. A few low-level execs were made scapegoats. The system, as Jimin feared, found a way to survive. Just better hidden now. Quieter. He heard footsteps behind him. You're not gonna jump, right? Jungkook's voice was lighter than before. Not healed, not whole, but stitched enough to walk again. Jimin smiled faintly. Not today. Jungkook sat beside him, handing over a cup of hot barley tea. You haven't answered any calls. I know. There are rumors about us again, Jungkook said after a pause. That we're planning to sue HYBE. That we're getting back together. That we've joined a cult in Jeju and changed our names. Jimin let out a small laugh. Let them write whatever makes them sleep at night. But we are planning something, right? Jimin looked at him. You tell me. Jungkook's eyes flickered with something. Hope, or maybe just mischief. You said once that if you could rebuild from nothing, you'd do it with no mirrors. Just microphones. I meant it. Then let's do it. And just like that, it was real. But nothing good came without ghosts. 2 days later, they met with Namjoon again. This time it was in a rented cabin in the hills. No cameras, no assistants, no PR teams. Just 3 men, scarred and scarred again, trying to rebuild something that didn't make them bleed. You know what we're doing is dangerous, Namjoon said, pouring coffee into cracked mugs. If we start a new label, we become targets. Not just business-wise. They'll frame us, cancel us, maybe even try to resurrect old scandals. Some of them real, some invented. I'd rather die building truth than survive inside a lie, Jimin replied. Are you ready to deal with the weight of power? Really hold it, Namjoon asked. Not just shout at the system, but become the system and refuse to let it rot? Jungkook was silent. Then he said, I'm tired of asking permission to be myself. And that became the slogan. They didn't announce it. No press, no launch party. Just a quiet drop on a small website. A manifesto, a name studio sang, and a promise. We don't manage artists. We protect voices. Applications poured in. Not from famous idols. From broken trainees. People who had almost debuted 10 times. Dancers discarded after injury. Vocalists told they weren't marketable enough. They came from basements, from hospital beds, from places Jimin recognized in his bones. But the industry noticed, and retaliated. A week later, their lawyer disappeared. No calls, no warning. The next day, a news article painted him as having fled with embezzled funds. A complete fabrication, but convincing. One by one, collaborators dropped off. Studios canceled reservations. Distributors pulled out. And then, HYBE filed a lawsuit not for defamation, but for intellectual identity theft. They're suing us for being ourselves? Jungkook said, incredulous. They're not suing you, Namjoon corrected. They're sending a message. You'll never truly escape us. That night, Jimin received a package with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a single piece of paper. It read, We built your voice. We can erase it. He didn't sleep. Instead, he played the contents of the flash drive. It was old rehearsal footage. Him, 17, falling during a performance, crying in frustration, and in the background, an executive voice, cold and amused. Break him early. Then he'll never stop performing to be loved. He smashed the laptop against the wall. The next morning he called Seojin. Record everything, he told her. Whatever happens next, let them see it. A week later, Studio Sang held its first showcase. No lights, no branded merch, just a black box stage, one mic, and performers who had nothing left to prove, but that they existed. They streamed it live. Millions watched. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was true. One girl rapped about the pills that made her forget her name. A boy sang a lullaby he wrote for the part of himself he'd buried to past editions. And Jimin? Jimin stood on stage and read the sentence from the flash drive aloud. Break him early. Then he'll never stop performing to be loved. Then he looked into the camera and said, You didn't break me. You just taught me what not to become. The stream was shared 300 million times. HYBE's stock dropped 17% in a day. The lawsuit dropped, quietly, privately, but the war wasn't legal anymore. It was cultural, and it was far from over. That night, after the showcase, Jungkook found Jimin sitting in the alley behind the venue, crying silently. I thought winning would feel better, Jimin said. Jungkook sat beside him. It's not winning, it's surviving. Jimin wiped his face. Is that all we're doing? No, Jungkook said. We're teaching people how. Then they sat in the silence. The kind that didn't hurt. Not anymore. The kind that meant the world had changed because someone somewhere was finally listening. And this time, they were never going to shut up again. You need to understand, Jimin, Namjoon said, leaning across the desk in the dimly lit conference room that smelled of stale coffee and dried sweat. They are not scared of your music. They are scared of your influence. Jimin's eyes didn't leave his. Namjoon waited. The silence stretched so long it felt like it would start bleeding. Then Jimin spoke, a voice low, cracked with sleeplessness and resolve. They should be. 3 weeks had passed since the studio sang Showcase, and it had done more than shift public perception. It cracked a system that had long operated like an unshakable monarchy. Contracts were being reviewed. Lawsuits were being drafted. Parents of trainees were organizing petitions. Legislators, ones who had remained comfortably distant, were now speaking carefully in public, while whispering to both sides behind closed doors. And deep within the belly of HYBE's shell corporations, a different kind of conversation was unfolding. The one no one was supposed to hear. "I got this from a cleaner," Taehyung said, dropping a battered digital recorder on the floor between them. Jungkook stared at the device like it was ticking. "This cleaner was fired from HYBE last year," Taehyung continued. "She'd been there for almost a decade. She said she wasn't even supposed to be on that floor. Said she was told it was storage. But she found a room. Soundproofed, insulated, bolted from the outside." Jimin's stomach turned. And inside, nothing but a chair, a spotlight, and a speaker system. Jungkook flinched. Namjoon frowned. "Why the speaker system?" Taehyung pressed play. They listened. Static. Then a voice. Calm, male. Almost soothing. "You will smile. You will remember your lines. You will not cry where cameras can see. You are nothing without the stage. Repeat it back." Silence. Then the same voice again. Again. Jungkook's hands clenched so hard his knuckles cracked. "I heard that voice before. When I was 17. They'd play it through the walls when I was in punishment mode." "Jesus Christ," Namjoon whispered. "That wasn't conditioning," Jimin said, voice quiet. "It was breaking. Systematic breaking." "I'm not done," Taehyung said, and handed over a sealed envelope. Jimin opened it. Inside were medical reports, evaluations of idol trainees labeled as non-compliant, and prescriptions traced back to shell clinics. Every single treatment listed under mental health was actually chemical sedation. Doses just under lethal. A note attached said, 3 overdoses never made the news. I saw the bags myself. I can't sleep at night anymore. It was unsigned. That's it, Jimin said. We go public. Again. Bigger. Global. Namjoon rubbed his face, exhausted. And this time they'll do more than cancel us. They'll try to disappear us. Let them try, Jungkook muttered. We already disappeared once. We came back. No, Jimin said, standing. This time we arrive. The following week was a blur of planning, contacts, encrypted meetings, and fragile alliances. Seojin returned to their side, limping from an accident that had left her car crushed on the freeway. She smiled through cracked lips. They thought that would stop me? I reported from war zones, Jimin. HYBE's just a prettier dictatorship. They coordinated with global outlets, The Guardian, Le Monde, NHK. They worked with whistleblower networks and independent journalists, not entertainment reporters. The aim wasn't to entertain. It was to expose. And then they prepared the documentary. Idol/Hostage. A full-length feature detailing the systematic dismantling of individuality, the monetization of trauma, and the industrialization of silence in the K-pop system. No CGI, no background music, just faces, stories, and tears. They included everything except one final piece. Jimin's full statement. He hadn't recorded it yet. He had rewritten it 37 times. Each version too safe, too clean, too poetic. Until one night he locked the door, dimmed the lights, and set up his own camera. No crew, just him. He hit record, and began. You all know my name. You don't know my truth. I joined the system thinking it would give me purpose. It gave me punishment. I was told that my tears would be edited out, that my pain was a marketing liability, that smiling was part of my contract. I watched people I loved disintegrate behind perfect choreography. I watched children starve themselves to be weighed like meat in a marketplace. I watched the one person who gave me courage disappear and reappear like a ghost, Jungkook, because the alternative was dying. And I stayed silent. For years. Because I thought I was saving us. I wasn't. I was cooperating with the machine. But not anymore. He looked straight into the lens. Not like a performer, like a survivor. If you're a trainee right now, locked in a dorm, staring at a ceiling you can't breathe under, I see you. If you're a fan who loved us and now feels lost, I understand. We're lost too, but we're finding the map together. And this is not a fall from grace. This is a fall into truth. He sent the video. The documentary went live in 37 countries simultaneously. And then the storm truly began. HYBE responded with a counter-campaign. Fabricated footage, deepfakes, pre-recorded apology clips allegedly from JIMIN and Jungkook, easily debunked, and a PR spokesperson who collapsed on air when asked about the conditioning rooms. But the damage was done. Class action suits began. A full-scale investigation by the Korean Ministry of Culture and Sports was announced. Foreign governments started looking into the use of K-pop as a political soft power weapon and its ethical cost. HYBE's chairman was arrested 2 months later, trying to flee through Incheon under a fake passport. And Studio Sang? It didn't just survive. It thrived. Because it never tried to be a label. It became a refuge. Not just for idols, but for anyone trying to sing past the static. One night, months later, JIMIN was standing on the balcony of their small HQ, watching a group of new artists rehearse on the lawn, barefoot, laughing between verses. No cameras, no perfection, just joy. Jungkook came up behind him. "They're not scared anymore," he said. "No," JIMIN replied. "Neither am I." And for once, that didn't feel like defiance. Felt like peace. JIMIN's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The applause from the crowd still rang in his ears. But it was hollow, distant. As though someone had turned the world's volume down and left only the reverberation of something broken. He stood behind the black curtain of Studio Sang's second global showcase. His breath shallow, his throat raw. This time they'd filled a theater in Berlin. 600 bodies pressed together, chanting for truth, not choreography. No one was dancing. The only moves made that night were between chords and words. Live poetry, stripped harmonies, monologues from artists who had once signed their names in blood under a dream. He should have felt victorious. But it didn't. He could feel it. Something was off. Taehyung found him first. "You shouldn't be alone." JIMIN didn't turn around. "I don't know if I should be anywhere." Taehyung paused behind him. "There's something you need to know. But not here." They moved quickly, leaving through the back of the building under cover of darkness. The streets were clean, quiet. Cold air cut through their coats as they slipped into a waiting car where Jungkook and Namjoon were already seated, faces grave. The moment the doors closed, Namjoon said it. "There's a mole inside Studio Sang." JIMIN's stomach clenched. "Inside? Who?" Jungkook shook his head. "We're still tracing it. But someone has been forwarding internal documents to one of HYBE's shadow boards." "Why now?" JIMIN whispered. "Because this next drop will break everything if it goes public," Taehyung said. "If it leaks, they'll spin it before we can contextualize it. Twist it into something that makes us look like manipulators instead of survivors." Namjoon handed over a folder. JIMIN opened it. Photos, contracts, surveillance footage, all tied to a name he hadn't heard in years. Lee Hannah. She'd been a trainee with them in the early years. Soft voice, sharp mind. Disappeared during their third pre-debut boot camp. The official story was family illness. But those who were paying attention knew she never returned home. Her dorm was emptied overnight. She'd stopped existing. Now she was here, in this folder, attached to names, payments, covert directives. She was working under a subsidiary, her role redacted in all company records. But here was the truth in cold ink. She was overseeing a rehabilitation facility for non-conforming artists. "You think she's the mole?" JIMIN asked. "We think she's the weapon," Jungkook replied. "She's not doing it willingly," Namjoon added. "She's trapped. And they're using her history with us to drive a wedge." JIMIN stared at the photos. Lee Hannah, smiling in a training room, crying behind a stage, gone for so long, now brought back as a ghost puppeteered by the very system that disappeared her. "What do they want?" JIMIN asked. "Control," Taehyung said. Of you. Of Jungkook. Of the story. And what happens if they don't get it? Then they burn the narrative to the ground, Namjoon said. With us inside it. Silence. Jimin ran a hand through his hair, the edge of his fingernails tracing the back of his scalp like he was trying to peel something invisible off his skin. Let me talk to her, he said finally. Namjoon blinked. What? Let me find her, Jimin said. If there's still anything of who she was, she'll listen. You don't even know where she is, Jungkook said. I'll find her. Then we're coming with you, Taehyung said. No, Jimin said, voice sharp. She'll run. She always ran when there were too many voices in the room. Just let me try. They argued for an hour. But by morning, he was on a train to Busan with only a small backpack and a burner phone. 3 days later, he found her. It was a rehabilitation center built like a hospital but operated like a museum. White walls, white floors, white silence. He checked in under a fake name, a journalist researching post-trauma arts therapy. A lie, close enough to truth that his voice didn't shake when he said it. She came to meet him in the garden on the second floor, where no cameras reached. Her face was thinner, her hair shorter, but her eyes were exactly the same. He said nothing for a full minute. She sat across from him, legs crossed, calm. Then she spoke. I knew you'd come. Jimin swallowed the lump in his throat. Then why help them? She tilted her head. Why did you? That stopped him cold. You think I betrayed you, she said. But we were all in the same war. I just surrendered earlier. They used you, he said. They're still using you. She smiled faintly. And they used you to build their empire. I left, he said. And I stayed. Silence passed between them like wind between ruins. She leaned forward. Do you remember that night? The night they made me perform in front of the mirrors for 6 hours because I blinked wrong in front of a judge. He closed his eyes. He remembered. I counted every breath I took that night, she said. And then I stopped counting. And when I stopped, they knew they had me. You were 17. And you were 16 when you watched and said nothing. Jimin flinched. I don't hate you, she said. I just stopped waiting for you to save me. I'm not here to save you, he whispered. I'm here to undo what we helped build. She looked at him, and for a moment he saw it. The girl who used to hum old R&B songs in the corner while the others stretched. The one who used to steal snacks and share them. The one who cried only when the lights were off. I'm not your enemy, Hannah. She took a breath, and broke. I don't know who I am outside of them, she said, eyes glistening. They erased me and then rebuilt me in their image. I don't even remember what my voice sounded like when it wasn't being used. Jimin reached across the table. Then let's find it. That night she sent the documents back to him. All of them. Every floor plan. Every surveillance log. Every buried scandal. And with it, a final note. I may not be brave enough to speak, but you are. Don't waste it. He left at dawn. When he returned to Seoul, Studio Sang was in chaos. Their internal network had been breached. Videos deleted. Backups compromised. But Jimin wasn't afraid anymore. They had one thing left. Memory. And they turned it into fire. A final broadcast. Live. Unfiltered. No press allowed. Just artists. Each one telling the story of what happened behind the masks. No edits. No take-twos. And then Jimin stood holding up a photo of Lee Hannah. This is who they erased, he said. And she is not gone. She is not a liability. She is not weak. She is proof that we survived. That we remember. That silence never wins. The world stopped again. But this time it wasn't afraid. It was listening. And just behind the curtain, Jungkook stood, watching the one person who once saved him finally save someone else. It began with a note, left under the door of Studio Sang's headquarters, written in small, neat handwriting on plain stationery. They're going to erase you, not with noise, with silence. No signature, just a warning. And it was right. In the weeks following the last broadcast, the world quieted again, not with healing, but with orchestration. Social feeds dried. Algorithms shifted. Media outlets stopped requesting interviews. Suddenly, their names stopped trending. Not from hate, from vanishing. They weren't being attacked. They were being forgotten. "They're starving us," Namjoon said, pacing the hallway of their third-floor workspace, where the lights flickered like nervous eyes. "They're not fighting us with lawsuits anymore. They're pulling every line of oxygen, influence, distribution. Even banks are questioning our legitimacy now." Jimin sat at the edge of a table, staring down at his hands. "No one's attacking," he said, "because no one's supposed to know we exist." Jungkook leaned against the wall, his voice sharp. "It's worse than being hated. It's annihilation." They had faced fire. They had faced betrayal. But this was something colder, cleaner, executed with boardroom precision and surgical intent. Legacy collapse done algorithmically. First, older content was flagged as copyright sensitive. Then, emails to international venues were marked undeliverable. Then, invitations stopped arriving. Partnerships dissolved in unread inboxes. It was as if Studio Sang had never existed. "They want us to break in a new way," Taehyung said, arms crossed. "Not loud, quiet, one piece at a time." Seojin confirmed it in the following days. Her journalist credentials had been revoked from certain Korean outlets without explanation. And 3 extranees who had spoken on camera were now unreachable. Their family members denied ever being involved. "Memory is the final battlefield," she said. "They've stopped defending themselves. They're rewriting the world around you instead." So the team met underground, literally, in the unused subway station beneath Mapogu, where abandoned tracks stretched into forgotten tunnels. They used candles for light. The signal was weak, but the silence was honest. "We have one option left," Namjoon said. Jimin looked up. "What?" "We dismantle the machine from within. Fully. Open the vault." "You mean?" "Yes," he said. "The founding contracts. The buried documents. The ones that named executives, board members, psychological handlers. The origin of the idol system as it exists." Jungkook's eyes narrowed. "We could end up in prison. Or worse," Taehyung added. "But we'd take the entire tower with us," Namjoon said. Silence settled like dust. Then Jimin said, "Do it." They spent weeks preparing. Everything had to be physical. No digital trace. Printed documents. Secure couriers. Only people they trusted. And in the meantime, the pressure built. One night, Jimin received a call from an unknown number. He answered without speaking. A voice spoke. Calm. Familiar. "I told you once you were replaceable. You've proven me wrong. Congratulations." "Han," Jimin whispered. Han, the former HYBE executive who had threatened him in that cold room long ago, chuckled. "You've caused quite the stir. You've become the virus they can't vaccinate." "Then why call?" "To give you a choice." Jimin stood from the bed, pulse hammering. "You don't have the power to offer choices anymore." "Don't be so sure," Han said. "You see, Jimin, when you exposed everything, you didn't just attack a company. You weakened a global export. And now there are forces bigger than HYBE who want you to disappear." "You mean the government?" "I mean interests. Political. Financial. The soft power of K-pop is not a playground. It's a weapon. And you made it bleed in public." Jimin said nothing. "You have 3 days," Han continued. "Stop your little crusade. Release a statement of reconciliation. Apologize. Call it a misunderstanding. Or you won't just be forgotten. You'll be revised." The line went dead. Jimin stared into the night. And for the first time in months he was truly afraid. When he told the others, no one spoke for a long time. Then Jungkook said, "Then we finish it before the 3 days are up." It was a race. A breathless, sleepless sequence of back-alley print shops, encrypted networks, smuggled interviews, and final edits. The report was titled, "The Idol Blueprint, Confessions of a Manufactured Generation." It would contain everything. The original contracts drafted when the group was formed, predating even their debut. The pages that discussed psychological conditioning, image algorithms, synthetic scandals, the artificial inflation of fan engagement, the behavioral data sold to third-party research firms, the disappearances that were sanctioned, the collapse events staged for sympathetic PR. Everything. They were ready to publish at dawn. At 3:47 a.m., the power to Studio Sang's HQ was cut. Doors burst open. Uniforms rushed in. No police markings. No official documentation. Just men with weapons and silence. Jimin woke to Jungkook screaming his name as the room filled with shadows. They were pulled apart. Dragged down different hallways. Phones destroyed. Paper scattered. One of the drives stomped beneath a boot. But before Jimin was thrown into a waiting van, he slipped one tiny flashcard into the lining of his boot. The backup. The last copy. Then everything went black. He woke up in a windowless room. Wrists bound. Throat dry. A camera blinked red in the corner. But he smiled, because he knew Namjoon had planned for this. And hours later, across the world, on platforms they couldn't trace, mirrored through dozens of decentralized networks, the blueprint went live. Unstoppable. The footage of the break-in, the contracts, the fake scandals, the idol simulations drafted in boardrooms years before debut. Everything. It didn't just shatter HYBE. It ignited an inquiry into every major K-entertainment conglomerate. A coalition of international watchdogs formed overnight. Documentary filmmakers flew to Seoul. Foreign governments froze sponsorships. Jimin was released the next morning with no explanation. So were the others. And standing outside the gates of a quiet holding facility, bruised but alive, they waited for him. Jungkook stepped forward first. "You did it." Jimin shook his head. "We did." Namjoon wrapped his arms around him. Taehyung cried without shame. Even Seojin smiled through split lips. The machine was breaking, and they were still standing. Weeks later, in a quiet gathering by the Han River, they performed one last time. No stage, no lights, just a circle of survivors. Each one sang a single verse from their past. But the words were no longer just lyrics. They were eulogies, testimonies. And when it came to Jimin's turn, he didn't sing. He whispered, "I thought they owned our stories, but we were the only ones who ever really lived them." He looked around, not at fans, not at cameras, at his brothers, at the ones who stayed, and the ones who left, and those who never made it. And in that stillness, someone in the circle began humming. It wasn't a song anyone had released, but everyone knew it. It was the tune of being free. And finally, after all the years of silence, it didn't hurt to hear. "You said it would be over," Jungkook whispered, his voice ragged and low. "You promised." Jimin couldn't look at him. They stood in a back alley behind a courthouse in downtown Seoul, where the International Tribunal had just concluded a 5-hour closed hearing on the blueprint files. The streets outside were humming with media vans and silent, wide-eyed protesters who no longer held signs. They didn't need to. The truth was now louder than any protest. But Jimin couldn't feel any peace in it. He lit a cigarette with a trembling hand, even though he hadn't smoked in years. The flame from the lighter flickered against his face like a candle burning for something already dead. "I didn't say it would be over," Jimin finally said. "I said we'd be free." Jungkook turned away, running both hands through his rain-damp hair. His voice cracked. "We're not free. We're just exposed." That word stung like acid, because it was true. Since the broadcast of the blueprint and the global outrage that followed, every eye that once adored them now watched with a new kind of obsession, curiosity, disbelief, discomfort. They weren't idols anymore. They weren't even celebrities. They were symbols, warnings, broken glass still reflecting too many faces. And people didn't know what to do with them. Studio Sang had closed its doors voluntarily a week earlier. Not because it failed, because it couldn't become what the world was trying to make of it. A church of trauma. Jimin refused to let it be that. "We didn't start a movement to become martyrs," he had said. "We started it so nobody had to be one again. But in doing so, They became the living evidence of everything wrong, and everything unforgivably true. JIMIN dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his heel. "There's more," he said quietly. Jungkook stared at him. "What do you mean?" JIMIN reached into his coat and pulled out a slim hard drive, wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Jungkook without meeting his eyes. "It's a recording, from 2018. One of the executives, Park Sun-ho. He'd been doing psychological evaluations without permission. Personality mapping. Conditioning trials." Jungkook's hands went cold. "I thought all that was in the blueprint. This one wasn't. It's us." Jungkook opened the cloth. "This is from our dorm? Hidden mic. In the bathroom vent. Every conversation we ever had in that apartment." He archived it. "Not for security. For study." Jungkook blinked, his breath catching. "Why didn't you show this before?" "Because if we release this, it proves they didn't just control our contracts. They invaded our humanity, our friendships, our fears. There's a recording on that drive where you told me you wanted to disappear. Not leave, disappear. And I didn't say anything. I made you laugh instead. Like that would fix it." Jungkook's throat tightened. "You were trying to protect me. I was trying to survive," JIMIN said, tears burning behind his words. "And maybe I killed something in both of us doing it." He turned to leave, but Jungkook grabbed his arm. "Wait." JIMIN stopped. Jungkook's hand didn't release. "If we share this, it doesn't break them. It breaks us again." "I know. Then why do it?" "Because someone has to show what abuse sounds like when it's not screaming. When it's just someone not being heard." Jungkook looked at the drive, then at JIMIN. "We're going to lose more people. They'll say we're exploiting it. That we're attention-starving. That we're still performing." JIMIN smiled bitterly. "Let them say it." And the next day they released it. No press release. No interviews. No build-up. Just a file. Titled, "They Called It Home." It spread like rot under floorboards, slow, then sudden. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even scandalous in the way audiences were used to. But it was devastating. The conversations were ordinary. Small. Devastatingly human. Jungkook asking how many calories were in toothpaste. Taehyung sitting in the dark, whispering that he didn't want to be sexy anymore. Namjoon crying softly after fan meeting number 312, whispering, "I can't hear my own voice anymore." JIMIN saying, "If I vanish, please say it was on purpose, so they won't dissect me." The public didn't know what to do with it. Some cried. Some raged. Some asked why the members hadn't spoken earlier, as if trauma was only legitimate when it followed a schedule. Then, something unexpected happened. An idol from another label posted an anonymous essay titled, "You don't know what we survived to smile." Then a backup dancer wrote, "They called it rehearsal. It was indoctrination." Then a former vocal coach, "I helped break them, and I stayed paid to stay quiet." The floodgates cracked open again. But it wasn't JIMIN's flood anymore. This one belonged to everyone. He watched from the sidelines this time, quietly. Studio Sang had become a support network. Not a stage. No cameras. Just phones. Just voices. And for once, JIMIN allowed himself to breathe. Until the letter came. Handwritten. Signed. From Lee Hannah. She was in Tokyo now. In recovery. In peace. And for the first time in over a decade, she was writing music again. Her note read, "You didn't rescue me. You proved I never needed to be erased. That's the difference." He cried reading it. But it wasn't the old kind of crying. It was release. It was rain after years of drought. 1 week later, he walked into the studio one last time. The same broken place. Same scratched piano. Same dim light through cracked glass. He sat and recorded the only thing he had left. A voice memo. Just breathing. No lyrics. No music. Just 3 minutes of his breath. Soft. Shaky. Then calm. He titled it Proof of Life. And uploaded it. No description. No credits. No image. Trended for 48 hours straight. And then disappeared. Because that's what freedom looked like now. Not noise. Not victory. just breath, and the power to let it be enough.